The Arizona sun poured fire across the desert plain, bleaching the sky into a pale, endless blue. The wooden wagon creaked and groaned under its own weight as it rolled forward, pulled by tired mules with ears drooping like quilted leaves. Behind it, the Apache woman stumbled in her chains, her wrists raw from iron cuffs and her ankles cut from sharp edges that dragged against her skin. Every step was a battle between will and exhaustion. She leaned forward, her breath ragged, dust clinging to her lips as the laughter of men echoed cruelly above her. The men on the wagon carried themselves with the swagger of drifters who had lived too long without consequence. One held a half-empty whiskey bottle, sloshing it carelessly as he laughed at some bitter joke. Another spat over the side, the brown stain of tobacco splattering across the trail. The youngest, his face less hardened than the others, shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. The woman's suffering was no mystery. She was no criminal, no enemy in battle. She was simply vulnerable, and that made her a prize to men like them. Not far away, Ethan Cole rode his horse slowly along the edge of the desert trail. He wasn't a man easily stirred. His life was built around routine, hard work, and the quiet rhythm of a rancher's days. He knew the value of silence, of keeping to himself, but when his eyes caught the sight of the wagon and the chained woman, something within him hardened. Ethan had seen cruelty before, in bar fights, in rustler raids, in the brutal winters where livestock perished without mercy, but this was different. This was deliberate. This was human hands choosing cruelty. He pulled back slightly on the reins, steadying his horse as he observed from a distance. His dark eyes narrowed beneath the brim of his hat, studying every detail: the woman's trembling legs, the way the men laughed without care, the chains that caught the light in a mocking glint. His jaw set firm. Ethan Cole was not a man who went looking for trouble, yet trouble had a way of finding him, and sometimes, a man had no choice but to act. The silence of the desert pressed heavy around him as if waiting for his decision. The Apache woman lifted her head for the briefest of moments, her eyes glassy but alive. She saw the lone rider, the rancher whose presence broke the monotony of her suffering. There was no plea in her gaze, no cry for help, only the faintest spark of recognition as someone had noticed. For a woman treated as less than human, that recognition was almost enough to steady her legs. The chains rattled with her movement, the sound sharp and unnatural against the stillness of the land. Her spirit had been trampled, but not extinguished. Ethan could see it in her eyes. Ethan's hand tightened on the reins, leather creaking under his grip. His horse shifted beneath him, muscles rippling with restless energy. The animal sensed the weight in its rider's silence. Ethan guided it forward, slow and deliberate, until his shadow began to stretch across the trail where the wagon dragged its captive. Dust swirled around his boots as he approached, his face unreadable but his intent clear. The men turned their heads, their laughter faltering when they realized someone was watching. To them, this was their business, their profit. To Ethan, it was something that had no place on this earth. The man with the whiskey bottle squinted, raising a hand to shield his eyes against the sun. "What you staring at, cowboy?" he called out, his voice thick with liquor and arrogance. His companion smirked, nudging him in the ribs as if the situation were a joke. The youngest man shifted again, his unease deepening, though still he kept quiet. Ethan said nothing at first. He simply sat tall in the saddle, his gaze fixed not on the men but on the woman. His silence was more unsettling than anger. In the desert heat, silence often meant storms to come. Finally, Ethan spoke, his voice low but steady. "Let her go." The words carried across the dust and heat, not shouted, not barked, but firm enough to land with weight. The men on the wagon erupted into laughter. The one holding the reins of the mules shook his head, sneering, "You got no business here, rancher. Ride on back to your pasture. This don't concern you." Ethan's expression didn't change. He simply adjusted his grip on the saddle horn, his tone calm but edged with something immovable. "Every man's business is what's right and what's wrong, and this ain't right." The Apache woman blinked, her breath catching. Hope was a dangerous thing in her situation, fragile and fleeting. Yet the way this rancher spoke, without shouting or bravado, lit a spark within her chest. The men exchanged glances, their laughter subsiding under the weight of his certainty. The whiskey drinker spat into the dirt, glaring. "You plannin' to stop us by yourself?" "Three of us, One of you?" His words hung in the hot air, meant to intimidate, but Ethan didn't flinch. His silence, his stillness, was more dangerous than any boast. His hand rested casually near his side, calm as stone. The desert seemed to pause, as though the land itself waited. Even the mules stopped flicking their ears, sensing the tension. Ethan's horse stood solid, steady as a rock beneath him. The sun glared down on the trail, casting sharp shadows that split the earth. Ethan's eyes remained locked on the men, unwavering. He wasn't a man who believed in showdowns or dramatics, but he knew when a line had been crossed. Sometimes justice didn't come with a badge or a gavel, it came from a man who refused to look away. And Ethan Cole, the quiet rancher, would not look away now. Ethan sat tall in the saddle, the brim of his hat shadowing his eyes. His voice was not loud, yet it cut sharper than a whip in the dry air. The three men watched him with growing unease, the weight of his calmness pressing heavier than anger ever could. The one with his hand near the holster smirked, but the gesture felt forced, his bravado masking nerves. Ethan didn't blink, didn't shift. His stillness was deliberate, controlled, the kind of presence forged from years of hard labor and harder choices. The woman's breath quickened, as though she could sense the change. The wagon wheels creaked as the mules shuffled in the silence. Dust swirled lazily in the air, settling against the Apache woman's sweat-damp hair. Her chains clinked softly as she steadied herself, staring at the man on horseback with something like disbelief. Ethan was not yelling, not threatening, but his words still hung heavy in the space between them. "Unchain her." The men weren't used to defiance, least of all from someone alone. One spat into the dirt, masking hesitation with contempt. "You really think you're some kind of hero, rancher?" Ethan's eyes never wavered. He wasn't thinking of heroism, or glory, or even danger. He thought of what his father once told him: a man's worth is measured by what he allows to happen around him. He could ride on and pretend it wasn't his concern, but those chains would haunt him. The Apache woman's weary eyes would stay burned into his mind, a reminder of the moment he chose cowardice over decency. So he sat, unshaken, the desert sun painting sharp lines of determination across his face. He was one man, yes, but he was enough. The youngest of the three men shifted uneasily in the wagon. His hand tightened around the edge of the bench, knuckles pale. He had followed these two older drifters for profit, not conviction. Now, confronted with the rancher's unyielding presence, doubt gnawed at him. His gaze darted between Ethan and the chained woman, her pain undeniable. For the first time, guilt sank into his gut, but the leader noticed his hesitation and barked a laugh, covering the tension. "Boys, this rancher thinks he can tell us how to handle business. Maybe we ought to teach him what happens when you meddle." His voice rang false. The sneer in his tone was betrayed by the flicker in his eyes. He hadn't expected resistance, not out here where lawmen were scarce and miles of desert swallowed justice whole. Yet here stood Ethan Cole, quiet and unshakable, breaking that certainty. The second man grinned wickedly, brushing his fingers over the butt of his pistol. "Maybe we should drag him right alongside her," he muttered. The words carried malice, but even he glanced sideways at Ethan's still figure. It wasn't what Ethan said, but how he said it, calm, without fear, that unsettled them more than open aggression ever could. The Apache woman closed her eyes briefly, as though gathering strength. For so long, she had been forced to walk under jeers and laughter, treated as a prize to be sold. Now someone had spoken for her, not in pity but in defiance. When she opened her eyes again, they burned with a faint resilience. Chains weighed her body, but not her spirit. She knew this man might die for standing here, but he had already restored something stolen, her dignity. She straightened as best she could, her back no longer bowed by shame, even if her wrists were raw. Ethan leaned slightly forward in his saddle, his horse stepping with controlled precision. He didn't reach for his gun. He didn't need to. Not yet. His calm was the weapon, each word like a hammer striking iron. "The woman walks free," he said. His tone was final, like the judgment of a man who had already decided the outcome. The men glanced at one another, weighing their odds, measuring courage against fear. Their laughter was gone now, replaced by the sound of nervous breathing. Ethan's stillness demanded a choice: cruelty defended or cruelty undone. The desert wind stirred, waiting. The leader spat again, but this time his mouth was dry. He muttered curses, feigning confidence he didn't fully feel. His partner flexed his fingers near his holster, sweat beading along his brow despite the dry heat. The youngest man swallowed hard, his voice breaking the silence for the first time. Maybe we should just let her go," he stammered. Both older men snapped their heads toward him, fury flashing in their eyes. "Shut your mouth," the leader barked, but doubt was a seed already planted. Ethan caught eye to the tremor of conscientia and held to it like a wedge that might split stone. Ethan spoke again, quieter this time. "You know it's wrong. Don't let their cruelty chain you too." His words were aimed at the youngest, his tone not accusing but steady, as if offering a way out. The boy shifted, shame flickering across his face. He wanted to look away, but Ethan's gaze held him. The Apache woman watched silently, her chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. The moment hung delicate, like a thread stretched taut, threatening to snap at any sudden move. The desert, vast and merciless, seemed to shrink around the standoff, pulling them all into its center. The second man cursed under his breath, his nerves fraying. He didn't like this silence, didn't like the way the rancher's presence bent the air heavy against his skin. His hand twitched near his gun again, and Ethan noticed, though he didn't move, one wrong gesture could explode into violence. But Ethan's patience was stronger than impulse. He had broken horses more stubborn than these men, held his ground against storms fiercer than their threats. His strength was not in speed, but in resolve, the kind that made others question themselves before a shot was ever fired. He waited. The leader finally snapped, his voice sharp with frustration. "Enough of this. You think you are the law out here?" His laugh was harsh, brittle. "This desert doesn't care about right or wrong, it only cares who's left standing." Yet even as he spoke, his hands betrayed him, hesitating, trembling just enough to show fear beneath bravado. Ethan let the words roll past, unmoved. "Then stand," he replied simply, his tone like stone grinding against stone. The phrase landed heavier than a threat. The leader clenched his jaw, fury and uncertainty warring within him. The desert silence pressed down once more. The Apache woman's chains rattled softly as she shifted her stance, eyes never leaving Ethan. He was her anchor now, the lone figure who refused to let cruelty pass unchecked. The men were three, but they quarreled among themselves, their unity splintered by fear and doubt. Ethan remained whole, his resolve unbroken. Even the land seemed to recognize it. The horizon shimmered in the heat, the mules brayed uneasily, and the wagon wood groaned as if sharing the tension. Ethan's horse exhaled slowly, muscles coiled but calm. This moment was no longer just about one woman, it was about what men choose to be.